Welcome to the Working Intelligence podcast, part of Working Intelligence, the AI Optimism Project. I'm Jordan Hirsch, and I'm honored to be joined by my friend and fellow Palantirian, Mike Gallagher. Mike spent 7 years in Congress representing the 8th District of Wisconsin, served in the Marine Corps as an intelligence officer with 2 deployments in Iraq, and holds a PhD from Georgetown. We're recording this podcast on the eve of the 24th anniversary of September 11th, a hinge point in our history, and proving really that our fight was not over after the end of the Cold War. It demanded the grit and ingenuity of the American people to adapt and overcome. And today we stand on another hinge point, facing new challenges from powers like China, which demands every ounce of that grit and ingenuity, supercharged by artificial intelligence. We're going to talk to Mike today about that evolution. Mike's really somebody who's lived that evolution from the start of the post-Cold War period until this point, and talk about how American workers rose to meet the challenge of that era and how AI can empower them to meet the challenges that we face today. So, Mike, really glad to have you here for this podcast and an important moment for us to reckon with the history of 9/11, and couldn't think of anyone better to do it with. So on that note, why don't you just start by asking you, on the 24th anniversary, what did 9/11 mean to you in your career? I assume it was somewhat formative and perhaps the reason for your various forms of public service, but would love if you could reflect a little bit on your decision to serve in the Marines and to run for Congress and what effect 9/11 had on those decisions.
Well, first of all, Jordan, it's an honor to be with you, and it's an honor to be called your friend in addition to your colleague. I've long admired your work, and before we worked together here at Palantir, we crossed paths in various efforts to improve American national security. So it's always fun to be with you. I would say, well, first of all, it's crazy to think that it's 24 years ago. It does seem less far removed than that in my own mind. I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. I remember vividly, this was, data. I'm now like old, particularly at a company like Palantir, 41 basically means you're
you and me both.
Age. But we had just gotten big projector screens in the classroom, which was a massive deal in terms of education technology at the time. And so I remember the plane hit the first tower while I was still at home because I was on the West Coast. And then when I got to zero period, the second plane had hit, but then I watched the towers crash to the ground in my American government class at the time, AP American Government. And I mean, obviously it was instantly palpable and clear that this was a sort of a history-altering event and an incredibly somber and tragic event. That being said, it wasn't as if I immediately knew, oh my gosh, I have to rush out, find a Marine Corps recruiting station, put on a uniform. I mean, I was lucky enough not to have anyone in my immediate family directly affected by it, although my brother-in-law, who was not yet engaged to my sister, was working in the Twin Towers on a floor above where the plane hits, but happened to sleep in that day, crazy enough, and there's thousands of stories like this. But it still seemed like I didn't immediately connect the dots in terms of what was my part in the response. Obviously, it took some time for our country to work out the response. It wasn't until I went to college the next year and we got more fulsomely engaged in the Middle East, particularly after the invasion of Iraq, that I started to think about, okay, what are we doing? What is this problem we're grappling with in terms of Salafi jihadists that want to kill us and destroy our way of life? That seems odd because we're America, we're great, we have no enemies, history had ended, etc. And I actually got so interested in that, I changed my major and I started studying Arabic and the Middle East. And the more I pulled that string intellectually, and the more I learned about the region, and I wrote a senior thesis examining terrorist groups and their involvement with civil society organizations, I just became fascinated by the Middle East. The more I started to think about, okay, maybe practically, maybe this is an opportunity to use these skills and put them to use for the country, and that would be better for me and for the country than going to Wall Street and just shifting numbers around on a spreadsheet. No offense to all my friends who did that. And then secondly, the country was at war. I didn't come from a military family, but I felt like I'd been pretty lucky to grow up in with a lot of advantages, attend some great schools. And then I felt like I had a debt I needed to repay to the country. And I knew I would kind of look back and regret it if I didn't step up and serve. I'm also kind of a bit of a contrarian by nature. And so at the time, it was not fashionable if you were at an Ivy League school to join the military in general, particularly by the time I went to officer candidate school. This was really when the war started going badly. What the Samara mosque bombing was in 2005, 2006. The bottom fell out of the country. This was like, the anti-Iraq war fever started to reach a fever pitch. So it was kind of a contrarian move. We had an ROTC program at Princeton, but nobody joined the Marine Corps, I think, for a couple years. So I was intrigued by doing something totally different. And everyone was like, what are you doing? Why are you joining the Marine Corps? I also wasn't, this may shock you to learn, Jordan. I wasn't like an athletic stud or anything. I was very much a bookish nerd my whole life. And so it took a lot of time for me to literally develop the muscles necessary to join the Marine Corps. And so, I don't know, there was like this circuitous path would be the short answer to this question, from 9/11 to my own like small role in fighting what became the global war on terrorism and being a small part of our country's response. And I'm happy to unpack that further. But the final thing I'd say is like, it was absolutely, besides marrying my wife, the best decision I'd ever made in my life. It was just the Marine Corps, particularly for someone who didn't know anything about the military, wasn't an ROTC. The way the Marine Corps has officer candidate school structured, like it gives you this opportunity to kind of figure out if you want to do it. And then like I really thought about there's no other domain in life where, as a 21-year-old right out of college, I could be in charge of 40 people and be thrust into this super demanding, challenging environment. And I wanted that combination of like a physical test, an intellectual test, a moral test, and it was awesome. I loved it. I love deploying. I think the weirdest thing for people to understand, like, at that age when you're young, you think you're invincible, and so like you're not encumbered by anything. Like, I wanted to deploy. Like, I volunteered for deployment. So I'll shut up there. I've talked too much.
No. I'm wondering. I mean, you pointed to when you joined the Marine Corps, which was really as things were breaking down in Iraq, and the strategy that we came to Iraq with was not the strategy that we needed to succeed and ultimately be able to disengage from the height of the war. And I'm wondering, and we might all be familiar with how that conversation played out in Washington, but you were really on the front lines of the ingenuity that was required to solve for that problem. And I'm wondering what it was like for you to deploy in the middle of this crisis as things were really breaking down and be a part of the shift in the American strategy toward a more successful strategy that allowed us to stabilize the country and save a lot of lives. How did that happen from your perspective, being in the Marines?
Well, I'd say two big things. One, prior to deploying, I kind of had this naive, quixotic, or even arrogant idea that because I spoke the language and I was a good student, that I was going to be like a modern day T. Lawrence and uniquely bridge the gap between the Marine Corps and like Anbari tribal sheikhs and things like that. I was quickly disabused of that notion. And I think I had a very simplistic understanding of the region, and even the Marines were trying to educate themselves at the time. The Commandant's reading list started to include all these books about counterinsurgency. It included T. Lawrence's memoir, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, and some of these books like The Arab Mind, which now in retrospect seem totally ridiculous and didn't really teach me anything about the specific microgeography of the specific part of Iraq that I went to, which was totally different than what was happening in Baghdad, and let alone in northern or southern Iraq. So I had to do a lot of learning on the ground, but I also got to see it firsthand. I got to actually see our strategy succeed because I did 2 back-to-back deployments, and in the early part of one of my deployments, the surge kind of happened in western Iraq in Anbar province, where the Marine Corps was, prior to it happening in the rest of the country. And so we went from, at the beginning of one of my deployments, a group of Al-Qaeda and Iraq operatives crossing the Syrian border dressed in stolen Iraqi army uniforms and slaughtering like 50 people in the local village and creating a ton of mayhem, to by the end of my deployment, we were mostly focused on economic issues, and we were targeting oil smugglers. And we felt very comfortable walking around the streets, in some cases without personal protective equipment. And it was just a remarkable change. I mean, an absolutely remarkable change. And so I kind of got to see the fruits of our counterinsurgency strategy, particularly as it was perfected by General Petraeus and a few others, play out firsthand, and kind of see all these fence sitters in the local tribal hierarchy, in the Al-Mahlawi tribe, the Kabuli tribe, et cetera, go from either straddling the fence or actively working against us to realizing that America was the strong horse. They should bet on us and help us decimate or actually completely destroy the lingering Al-Qaeda in Iraq network. Now, that's not to say we completely destroyed it, but it was, the success of our counterterrorism operations and our counterinsurgency operations was something to behold. Now, I will say, I think in retrospect, it does seem clear that all of that did was buy us time or the opportunity for Iraqi political figures and power players to forge a durable political consensus. And it was somewhat bizarre to me when the Syrian civil war emerged a few years later. At one point, I think, there was Syrian airplanes bombing the town that I was deployed to, Al-Qaim, because there was terrorists there. I'm like, what is going on? It's just such a fragile equilibrium. But it was absolutely fascinating. And I will say, the obvious things were true. You really have to understand the local dynamics. You have to be present, forward deployed. You have to get out of the base. You have to interact with the local officials. That was kind of my job. I was the commander of a human intelligence exploitation team, and our job was to gather information from human sources in order to get bad guys and keep Marines safe. And so, I don't know, it was absolutely fascinating to see the strategy kind of work over the course of one deployment to the next deployment.
One of the pitfalls in retrospect is that we focus so much on counterinsurgency as a result of Iraq that we were a little bit asleep at the wheel as another challenger rose across another part of the world in China. And the type of fighting that we needed to do in Iraq made it difficult to focus on the reindustrialization that we had kind of given up on in the wake of the Cold War and trying to reap the peace dividend in the wake of the Cold War. Can you talk a little bit about what was China doing in the meantime while we were focused in Iraq and doing the kinds of things that you were doing? And how did we get to the place where we are today, where we seem to be behind in key metrics like shipbuilding, or running a pace with them when 20 years ago that would have been a very far-fetched idea that America was running a pace of anybody?
Well, first, let me confess how odd it is that people now think I know something about China because I chaired the China Committee in Congress, because most of my career I was an Arabist. That was my background, my training. And to kind of tie it to your question, this question or the previous one, the first day of my second deployment, I arrived in country en route to Al-Qaim, which is a town near the Syrian border in Al-Anbar province. And I met a Marine who was leaving. I think this is my first one, I remember. And his name was Matt Pottinger. And Matt Pottinger was in my same military occupation specialty, was the commanding officer of what was called Het 1, the unit I took over near the Syrian border. And just fascinating, brilliant guy, former journalist. He had to get an age waiver to join the Marine Corps. Amazing story. But I remember talking to him, and even on he was leaving country. And usually, when you're about to leave country, you're pretty exhausted. But Matt still had his boyish grin and enthusiasm for everything. But he told me his life story, and he was a Mandarin linguist, a China specialist. He spent a decade in China. And I remember thinking at the time, why would an ambitious national security professional spend their time focusing on China? Right. China's not
we're here. Yeah,
exactly.
This is where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the Middle East for time immemorial.
Yeah.
We're fighting terrorists, what an idiot. I learned Arabic. I'm smart. But it turns out Matt was right. And I wasn't wrong per se, but he saw something I didn't. And, even when I was a Senate staffer and increasingly paying attention more to what China was doing. Matt was really the source of most of my education. And when I got elected to Congress, I made a point of we had a monthly meeting where, I kind of went to the Palantir grad school on China. I was a national security advisor on the Walker campaign. And I remember Matt would send me these very detailed memos where really he laid out the pattern of facts and the corresponding strategy response in a way that became the intellectual foundation for the Trump administration's approach to China in the first administration. But suffice it to say, and to directly answer your question, while they were sort of publicly, while we were inviting China into the global economic order in the hopes that it would moderate their political behavior, they were pocketing those concessions, growing more repressive internally, aggressive externally, and really with no intent to ever abide by the rules-based global order in general or their specific promises that they made as part of the session to the WTO in particular. By the way, those aren't the musings of like some Republican hawk. I think Rush Doshi would agree with that assessment if you read his book. The long game, it's always the strategy of, hide your ambitions, bide your time, and this latent ambition to not only be the dominant country in the Indo-Pacific region, but really the dominant country in the world. In fact, while historians will quibble over when the new Cold War with Communist China began, as they continue to quibble over when the old Cold War with the Soviet Union began, a lot of the initial aggressive island building efforts and corresponding territorial claims even predated Xi Jinping. And so I think what we're seeing now is an expression or a continuation of a concerted strategy that the Chinese Communist Party has had for decades. And it is a strategy to destroy the US-led global order, to displace our position of preeminence, and to become the dominant country in the world. And along the way, sever all our alliances.
Yeah. So now that we're in 2025, this is the big challenge that we confront. How do you think we can close the gap with China in the places where we've lost ground and retake the lead? And specifically, what can AI do for our defense industrial base if properly harnessed and implemented? And I guess the key question here is why is it so important for humans to be amplified and not replaced by artificial intelligence?
Well, in order, and maybe in simplest terms, how I think about this is, at a minimum, like the pass-fail grade for U.S. grand strategy is we should not be funding our own destruction, right? If there's one thing we've learned, like in the last 3 decades, is that the problem isn't that we didn't engage hard enough with China or that we didn't give them enough access to the global economy. It's not like we open one more theme park or have, more American movies in China or another American business. Suddenly the commies are going to wake up and think, you know what, we got America wrong. Let's change our whole approach. We should not be allowing US capital and intellectual property to flow to China in order to fuel their destructive ambitions, their genocidal ambitions internally, and their revanchist ambitions externally. It is long past time for us to put controls on outbound capital flows to China, to put sensible limits on their on their access to our own intellectual property, their presence at American universities, and also to reestablish some semblance of deterrence in cyberspace so that the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, i.e. intellectual property theft from China, does not continue. So that's point one. Point two, because we were complacent for decades, you're right to suggest that the American industrial base, and defense industrial base in particular, has become hollowed out. It's become brittle. We've gone from having a lot of companies in that space to it being concentrated in 5 defense primes. Increasingly, we're starting to see that change due to the efforts here at Palantir to revitalize the ecosystem and the new administration's push for non-traditional defense tech. But still, we're not moving fast enough. So we have to find a way to revitalize American manufacturing. That's where I think AI has so much promise, right? Far from being a threat to American workers, I actually think AI is going to be the Iron Man suit that we're able to wrap around every American worker who wants to work, bust their butt, allow them to make more money, be incredibly more productive. And the fact is, we just, as a matter of strategy, we're not going to beat China if we just try and throw more human beings and money at this problem. We have to find a way to fight smarter. And it's that American innovative ecosystem leveraging AI, software, cutting edge technology, pairing it with legacy industries that I think is going to be our opportunity to reduce our dependency on China in critical areas, revitalize our American manufacturing industrial base, and also ensure that they can't control the commanding heights of critical technology, whether it's AI, whether it's quantum, whether it's synthetic biotech, take your pick. Because what we've learned in recent years is that given dominance in those areas, they will weaponize that dominance, right? They're using their dominance in rare earth manufacturing and processing right now to kind of hold us over the barrel in certain diplomatic negotiations. They threatened to cut off the export of APIs during the coronavirus pandemic to plunge us into a sea of coronavirus. Imagine if we got into a confrontation over Taiwan with China and they cut off access to critical, microelectronics or rare earths or, ingredients for life-saving drugs. Or imagine if they weaponized the access that they now have to American critical infrastructure after the Volt and Salt Typhoon attack. So I guess all this is a long way of me saying, while we've paid lip service to the idea that we have an existential competitor in the form of the CCP, and while some are willing increasingly to say we're in the early stages of a new Cold War, we still haven't attacked this problem with the requisite sense of urgency that it demands, as if it were an existential threat. And every time I even would say that this is an existential threat, I would get the crap kicked out of me by the Washington Post and all sorts of commentators on TV, and I'd be called a neo-McCarthyite. But all you have to do is just read what Xi Jinping says, particularly when he's talking to party audiences. Like, he has no reservations when he's not talking to the Davos crowd, when he's talking internally, about talking about America as evil, about talking about the inevitable decline and demise of the capitalist-led order led by America, about saying, I will take Taiwan by force if necessary. He is preparing his country for war, and we still are not meeting the moment in order to deter a war.
Yeah.
On that happy note, I'll stop.
Yeah, on that happy note. Well, actually, maybe we'll try to turn to a happy note. Through your work at Palantir, you've been able to see where the industrial base is picking up AI to sort of speed along and supercharge what it's doing. I'm curious if you can share some examples in some of the spaces where you're active through Palantir, where workers are using AI to free themselves from drudgery so they can build better and faster and get back to the thing that they really actually want to be doing, which is building the things that America needs to stay strong and to win this fight.
Well, where I'm most excited about this, and perhaps it's because I represented a shipbuilding district, or perhaps it's because, I'm a Marine Corps officer, which means I'm a naval officer, which means, I think the Navy Marine Corps team is, the most important team that we have. But I think we have a massive opportunity to revitalize American shipbuilding right now. The Trump administration has rightly placed this as one of their highest priorities. And in our work at Palantir, we've already started to see some of the positive effects that applying actual commercial technology, AI-enabled software to manufacturing can have, the transformative effect it can have. For example, at Anduril, it's already delivered a 200-fold increase in supply chain responsiveness. That's now accelerating the production of unmanned surface vessels, which are critical to Indo-Pacific deterrence against China. Engineers now operate with full situational awareness when they're sequencing tasks, when they're resolving procurement friction, when they're adapting designs in real time. At Saronic, another great customer of ours, it's helping build the foundation for a fully digitized shipyard. So you're gonna have procurement, design, manufacturing unified into a single hyper-intelligent system where every input is tracked, every decision is contextualized, every risk is anticipated. And I think what's gonna emerge on the other side of that is an industrial shipyard machine with the agility of a startup and the precision of a defense prime. And this model, powered by Palantir software, is already scaling among America's allies. So on the Korean Peninsula, for example, HD Hyundai's flagship shipyard is operating at a tempo and scale that the United States hasn't matched in decades. South Korea now builds nearly 30% of the world's ships, and Hyundai alone commands 17% of global output. One yard there delivers nearly 5 times more commercial vessels than the entire U.S. shipbuilding base combined. So I think shipbuilding for me is just this perfect example of legacy manufacturing that's critical to U.S. national security, where the new administration clearly sees it as a priority, where you're starting to see the non-traditionals and foreign innovators do some really interesting things. And if we can just apply that to American shipyards, I think we can produce a quantum leap. One final story to illustrate how absurd the current situation is vis-a-vis China. I remember going to a master ship repair yard in Southern California in my first term when I was a freshman member of Congress. And they were just talking about how they just built a dry dock, right? Dry dock, big structure you need to repair ships. And they were telling me, and so I'm like, so where did you build it? Like, how did it work? And like, well, we built it in China. So you think about it, like, we're building dry docks on the West Coast so we have more ships to confront China, but we need China to build the things necessary to repair those ships. And in order to get it from the Pacific back to the West Coast, you have to cut it into 3 pieces, ship it, weld it back together. And they were like, oh yeah, we almost couldn't weld it back together because local politics were such that people were worried about underwater welders forcing the fish to go deaf in the harbor. And I'm like, come on, America, we got to get our crap together. It was like, this is totally absurd. So you're starting to see that change. I think we have an opportunity right now.
There's a big way in which, and I'm curious if you've found this in meeting with shipyard workers when you've gone to visit these sites, there's a big way in which there's so much that we're doing to get in our own way. And I find when we've been doing these stories for Working Intelligence, you find so many people who just really want to do the work that they signed up for, whether that's treating patients or building a product in a factory. And what's happened over the last 25 to 30 years is these barnacles of administration and data and emails and spreadsheets just suck the soul out of the work. And the real useful applications of AI are taking that stuff off the plate of the humans so that they can be their fully realized creative selves and produce at their fullest and really derive pleasure and meaning from their work, as opposed to being bogged down in all the barnacles that have kind of glommed onto their jobs. I don't know if you found that in the shipyards as well.
100%, right? Some estimates we've seen is that at various shipyards, people are doing productive work less than 20% of the time. Not through any fault of their own, but they're like compliant. And I'm sure this is a consequence also of being government contractors, right? You have to deal often with like webs of regulation and bureaucracy. But the consequence is that, people are spending 80% of their day doing mind-numbing, soul-crushing work, and nobody wants to be doing that, right? So what AI has the potential to do is liberate people from the soul-crushing work and allow them to focus on meaningful, productive work. It's interesting. This had just occurred to me now, so bear with me. I reserve the right to rescind this statement. There is a way, if you read like what Xi Jinping is talking about, right? His spirit animal is Stalin. And he talks about like engineering souls, right? Like this is sort of the Marxist-Leninist ideology that like the party can like engineer the souls of all the party members. Like we're sort of at Palantir doing the exact opposite, right? Like we're liberating souls from soul-crushing work so they can realize their highest potential. That's true in shipbuilding. It's true in legacy manufacturing. It's true in any industry that's collected the barnacles that you've talked about. And once you do that, I think you're also going to start to solve, I think the workforce challenges get much easier to solve. So for example, one thing I confronted when I was in politics was people paying a lot of lip service to this idea that, well, not everybody needs to go to college, right? Let's go into the trades. You can be a welder at a shipyard, or you can, do X, Y, Z and make money, and you can be making 85 grand a year right out of college and not have college debt. And like, it's all right. It's all true. And everybody like was saying the right things. But then I would ask parents saying this, I'd say, well, what about your kids? And they'd say like, well, I mean, my kids are going to go to a 4-year college, because there was still the stigma associated with the trades. There was still like this, people were still playing the status game of 4-year colleges. And so I actually think the more that manufacturing and the trades adopt cutting edge technology, the sexier it becomes for that 17-year-old or 18-year-old who's weighing, okay, I'm interested in working at a shipyard or working in agriculture, but I still feel this pressure to go get a 4-year degree, or maybe like my perception of that industry is that it's dirty, old school. My dad did it, my grandpa did it. Like, I don't know. Like, what's when you get into these companies that have adopted Palantir software, other cutting edge commercial technology, it's really exciting to see what like one worker can do. And I think that's going to be attractive to a new generation for whom the value proposition of higher ed is changing. You're probably better qualified to opine on that than I am. But I just think at some point, like if your 4-year degree is not getting you like a return on the investment, like you're going to look for alternatives. And if we can make it culturally attractive to go into the trades because it's technologically advanced, then I think you start to cook with gas. Because every industry I represented in Wisconsin, it really didn't matter. Their biggest challenge for really my 8 years in Congress was workforce. They just couldn't find enough people to do jobs. Like, so if you're willing to work hard out there, like the world is your oyster. Like there is no near-term possibility that AI is going to put you out of a job if you're willing to bust your ass. Cause like there is plenty of work to be done.
Yeah, I think one of the frustrating things about the messaging around AI is that it's going to take everything away from you. You won't have to do hard work. And actually, what we found at Palantir when we've worked with our customers, it's actually really high agency enabling, right? It actually takes the most hardworking people and gives them all of the autonomy that they would want. And if you're a 17-year-old kid and you want to have a major impact, come to a company that's using AI natively and just see your star rise, right? Like you can do so much more and not be burdened with all of the administrative tasks and not be buried under bureaucracy. It really allows the best ideas to win because it allows them to scale in a way that we've not seen before, quite frankly, because you can take all that knowledge, combine it with other people's knowledge, and as you said, you're cooking with gas. I guess that's a great place to leave it. For our last question, you represented a district in Congress for 7 years. What would you say to your former constituents or anyone else about workers in your district who are afraid of losing their jobs to AI? Why are you optimistic about American workers leading in AI innovation to strengthen our defense and more broadly to lead in AI in a commercial sense as well?
Well, I would say the only people who should be worried about AI taking their jobs are people who refuse or don't want to learn how to incorporate it into their day-to-day routines. And I think the great news is that there's a surge of enthusiasm about incorporating AI into day-to-day workflows, particularly in the manufacturing space. When it comes to the trades, as I said before, we have a huge shortage of workers. I think we're something like 300,000 welders short in the maritime industrial base. 300,000, like that's a massive amount. That's twice as big as the Marine Corps. So we need to recruit more kids to go into the trades. So again, if you are willing to work hard and learn new skills, then I think the world is your oyster. And to the point you made, Jordan, yeah, the work could be as hard, if not harder, but it's going to be more meaningful, more rewarding intellectually and ultimately financially, allowing people to provide for their family, which matters a great deal. I further say that, AI is becoming a selling point for manufacturers looking to recruit students into the workforce. I actually think like the next generation is going to discover use cases for AI in traditional industry that we can't even imagine right now. I even started to see it like, in the district I represented, is a huge dairy district, right? There are some counties where there are more cows than human beings. I think like your traditional conception of the dairy industry is like, well, okay, a mom and pop dairy, 50 cows, like, a lot of manual labor. Like, well, actually you go on some of these farms and you start to discover it's highly automated. It's highly technologically advanced. I mean, there's like robotic milking, there's drones that they use to like test the soil. If you're a conservationist, there's all sorts of ways you can use digesters and dewatering to, deal with nutrients that come from cows and things like that. So it actually ends up being a pretty technologically advanced industry. Even, milking cows can be exciting for the next generation. So I don't know. This is why I'm an optimist. I guess the other reason I'm an optimist is, two other reasons. One, working at Palantir, as maybe you and I are the only liberal arts majors at this company, you're surrounded by these geniuses from all over the country, super young, and like it keeps me on my toes every single day. I think, I was one of the youngest members of Congress when I got elected, so like I kind of thought I was smart relative to my old peers. Now I just have to like keep up every day, and to see the problems that are being solved by our engineers, not by them on their own, by the way, but working in partnership with customers in the manufacturing space. I mean, it's like magic when you see it happen. Like when you pair a 22-year-old genius computer science major from Stanford with like a third generation shipbuilder in Northeast Wisconsin with all the tribal knowledge, like it is like lightning in a bottle. That makes me an optimist. And final thing I'd say at the risk of being corny is like, America has demonstrated a remarkable capacity for course correction, for reinvention, for innovation. So as much as I spent the last, near decade in Congress warning about the China threat, I still would bet on America 10 times out of 10. I think we have all the advantages and we have a righteous cause. I mean, we're the good guys and we're facing off against the bad guys. And I think, you're seeing a wave of companies which previously wouldn't be willing to work with the government and the Defense Department because they had some moral equivalence after Palantir rushed into the breach and said, we are unabashedly want to help the American warfighter. We're seeing a sea change in that department. And the more we have America's best and brightest who would otherwise be optimizing algorithms for like, social media, applying their talents to national security, the more optimistic I become.
Yeah. I no better note to end on. And the only thing I'll add to that, in addition to being around the magic of Palantir, is being around the magic of the people that we work with and seeing past the headlines on AI, which are often very depressing, or assuming that we're going to either get killed or have our jobs be killed away, and seeing people who have been in the trades for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, people who work on factory plants, just ignore the noise and use a new tool that's available to them and achieve something they never thought was possible. So it's an exciting time. Hopefully we can have people focus on the good and drive in that direction. And Mike, really, thank you for joining us. Really glad to have you on Working Intelligence, and thank you for the work that you're doing to bring AI to the American worker. Much appreciated.
It's an honor. I've never been accused of being intelligent, but nonetheless,
I like
working. So I got half the equation.
Working.
Yeah, I like working, even if I'm not intelligent.
There we go. Thanks a lot.